When Abraham Lincoln arrived in Gettysburg on November 18, 1863, he was one of many participants in the ceremonies which would take place the following day, dedicating Soldiers National Cemetery. For the people of Gettysburg and the surrounding towns, Dedication Day was important. Because it was a special event, parents brought their children to see the politicians, the foreign visitors, and the military men. For all young people, it was clearly a moment to be remembered. Some of those young people wrote their memories down, and we can use their memories to recreate not just the events, but also the emotions of November 19th. What follows is a small sampling of what the young people remembered about Lincoln's visit and the dedication ceremonies. Listen to their words and imagine what you might have seen and heard if you had been there. It is November 1863, and the weather is beautiful. The sun is out, and it is quite warm.
All wanted to see him, and my strongest wish was to shake hands with him. I saw him several times, and he stopped in a house on York Street and the corner of the Diamond, and I got close to the open door and had a good view of him walking up and down the hall. I watched him until he turned into the parlor and the door was shut.
Our town was filled with people who had come in during the several previous days for the dedication of the cemetery. The procession was formed on the four principal streets, all centering the square: Chambersburg Street from the west, York Street from the east, Carlisle Street from the north, and Baltimore Street from the south, which led to the cemetery. The square was occupied by Colonel Ward Layman's bodyguard for Mr. Lincoln and was drawn up in an oblong formation, open order.
After some time, someone said, "There, Mr. Lincoln comes." I was awed by the appearance of the great tall man, and we and others shook hands with him. Mr. Lincoln went to the curb and mounted a horse, and continued shaking hands with people there. As I remember, the horse was a good size, but Mr. Lincoln's long legs made it appear small.
Mr. Lincoln came over from the Wool's house on horseback and took his position in the center of his bodyguard. The procession started, and I followed the column on the west side of Baltimore Street, remaining on the outside of the curb of the pavement, which was crowded with people. I recall very vividly the impression of Mr. Lincoln as I walked close to him on Steinwehr Avenue. His face, lined and sad, bore traces of the tremendous worry the ordeal of war had brought to him.
I remember vividly of a man who lifted me up to see Lincoln. This was opposite the courthouse. The street was crowded with people, leaving only room for him to pass on his horse. He would turn from side to side, looking at the people on either side when he passed with a solemn face. He looked odd in such a small horse.
I lost my place at the president's side, but managed to get through to the crowd and reached the platform upon which the exercises were to be held. I succeeded in getting close up to the north side of it and held my position until the preliminary exercises were over, and the Honorable Edward Everett had commenced his oration. When I climbed up the side of the platform with my feet on the floor of it and the left arm over the railing.
Lincoln sat on the platform in a rude little stiff-backed chair, hard and uncomfortable, but he hardly ever moved. Everett finished his speech. Lincoln took a metallic spectacle case from his pocket and put on a pair of steel glasses near the tip of his nose. Then, reaching in his side pocket, he brought out a crumpled sheet of paper. He smoothed this on his knee and read it. It was the notes of his speech. Then a dirge was sung, and Lincoln rose, his spectacles still on, but his notes back in his pocket. He was majestic. He spoke in a clear, pleasant voice that carried well. The first few sentences he spoke from memory, but he gradually drew his notes from his pocket and read them. He made gestures not with his hands, which held the notes, but with his body. He bowed from side to side. Just when we were settling down to hear the speech, it ended. It was startling, it stopped so suddenly.
When Lincoln had finished his address and taken his seat, the people stood, as if dumbfounded, not by what he said, as by its briefness. As I remember, it was the general topic of conversation for a long time. Little did they realize that it would go down in history as one of the greatest addresses ever delivered by man, and is now one of the classics of the age.
In the evening, there was a meeting in the Presbyterian church, and it was reported that Mr. Lincoln was to be there. The church was so crowded that many were turned away. I managed to work myself past the guard at the door and about halfway down the aisle. The aisle was blocked with others unable to get to seats. I looked every way for the sight of Mr. Lincoln, and by the time the meeting was nearly over, I felt sure he was not there. As the people arose to leave, I turned around to leave also, and there was Mr. Lincoln in a pew just at my side. I held my ground until he was in the aisle near me, when I put out my hand and said, "Mr. Lincoln, will you shake hands with me?" "Certainly," he said, and gave me a good strong grasp. He moved on and was soon lost to view, but I was a proud boy, and to this day feel a thrill of pride to have pressed the hand of one of the greatest men the world has ever known.